Well, good evening and welcome to an evening with the author. I am Dr. Claire, spiritual mentor and coach, author and speaker with Blazing Star Network. And with Blazing Star Network, I help busy leaders manage their lives to have more time to connect with themselves, the people they love the most, and God, and to do so without stress and guilt. This evening, we're looking at who is God to you and why does it matter? And we'll start with a prayer from Heart Cries, 100 Prayers of Faith, Hope, and Love. And this is found on page 41. And it is it true? Is it true that you love me just as I am, with all of my brokenness, all of my scars, with all of my hurting and pain, with all of my willfulness and disdain? Is it true that you want me just as I am, although I have struggled and strained, although I have erred and strayed, although I have caused you pain? Is it true that you call me by name just as I am, as I passed you by straight in my hurry to gain what seemed the best to my will? Is it true that you take me just as I am, whenever I stop and hold you again, whenever I turn and follow your path, whenever I hold out the love in my heart? Is it true that you mold me just as I am, whenever I yield to your way that makes sense, step out of the way and let you do your best, whenever your will is worked out in my life? Could it be true? Amen. So we're going into the chapter, we're going into chapter 2 now to talk about chapter 2, and chapter 2 is about missing God. And there are some things to consider as we think about God, because in looking at how to pray, we're going through the book How to Pray, and we started with ourselves, which might seem strange. Prayer is about God, but we started with ourselves because we can get in the way of our prayers when we are missing ourselves. And I'd use the analogy of going to bake a cake and not having all the ingredients or not having them in the right quantity. So it's kind of getting a sense of who we are. And now we're looking at, could we be missing God? The chapter Missing God is really to look and see if perchance when we go to pray, we are missing God. And so it's important to think about the approach, how we approach God. And approaching God must be done with reverence, with respect. There are people, when they go to approach certain people, they curtsy. We don't have a star to wish anything, or, we're not into that type of thing, but it's just that whole thing of respect, revering God. And at the same time, there is an intimacy that we'll kind of touch on in the next slide, but just want to throw it out here. The respecting and revering God doesn't mean that there's no intimacy with God. It's not, one does not negate the other. Neither does intimacy negate reverence or and respect. So that's one thing in our approach to God. We want to be respectful, we want to be reverent. But the other thing with our approach to God is brokenness. And I'll talk about brokenness in two ways. One is we don't need to be whole people to come to God. We can come to God in our broken state. And I think it's so appropriate that this picture has the leg, the ankle wrapped up. We can come to God and be reverent even when we are broken. And the other aspect of broken comes from Psalm 51, where the psalmist says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your tender mercies." I'll just turn there lest I misspeak. But it does start, "Have mercy with me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to your tender mercies." I haven't found it yet, but I remember that. And then it says later on, "A broken and contrite heart thou wilt not despise." That is verse 17. The sacrifice is acceptable to God. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. Oh God, you will not despise. That's Psalm 51, verse 17. So when we come into God, we need to have the approach, like I said, of reverence and in a sense of brokenness, recognizing our need before God. That's why I chose that prayer. It's like there's a certain wonder as well that in spite of who I am, in spite of everything I've done, God still accepts me. So I come in an attitude of penitence and a certain brokenness of knowing I'm not whole, but God will make me whole. And so, in many ways, it's all about attitude. And so, we address God, therefore, with both the intimacy and the reverence, recognizing God's otherness. And immediately we think of the Lord's Prayer and how Jesus started that, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And no need to get into whether it's father, mother, neutral, or all of that. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And so Jesus went beyond the convention of not naming God, though he didn't use God's name, but using that intimate Abba, the word, to say God has a relationship with us as a parent with a child. And that bond that exists between a parent and a child, there's a unseen bond that's there. And so there's that bond, and so there's that love, there's that intimacy. And later in the book I mentioned the prodigal son, so I'm not going to go into it here, but the father who will run to meet this child who's coming back. So there's that aspect of God wrapped up in the phrase our Father, but then to remember that God is other, who art in heaven, not dwelling here in time and space, but dwelling beyond time and space, and therefore other than we are. So we always have to have this reverence, this respect. Holy, hallowed be your name. Again, pointing to God's otherness. And so we come down to the need to prepare. Because when you think about it, if we need to approach God with brokenness, which, and I didn't use the word then, but I'll use it now, humility, respect, recognizing God's otherness, even though we are allowed this intimacy, it stands to reason that we need to prepare to come before God. I use the image of washing hands. We cleanse ourselves as best we can, knowing that the ultimate cleansing is going to come from God. But we want to have our minds ready. We prepare our minds, we prepare our hearts, and our body posture does make a difference. I have a video on YouTube um, on my YouTube channel, which I'm now beginning to put stuff on again, but it's like, should I kneel or pray or stand, something like that. And interestingly enough, even though I haven't been doing much with the channel, that particular video has over 1,000 views. And it just says it's a question we have. How do I approach God in terms of my body? And I think when we are coming to God with the understanding of who God is and the reverence we need with that and the humility, it will determine our posture. Because if we really understood who God is, we couldn't come to God anyhow. And, God is not going to chastise us if we lie down and pray. I think there's a part where that's okay. You're in bed, you start to pray, but that intentional prayer time, what's a good posture that shows that we have the right approach and the right attitude? Those are the questions we have to answer for ourselves. But kind of turning our thoughts to God, there was I say prayer is surrender. If you were to ask me what prayer is, I would say prayer is surrender. It's surrendering who we are to all that God is, who we are, what we want, surrendering all of that to God. Remember years ago, when I used to give out Sunday school poems for people to learn, there was one that said, prayer are thoughts turned Godward. And I think there's a sense of that. So when we think of mindset, how do we focus on God? How do we turn our attention to God? And how do we get our hearts in tune with God? Our hearts, our spirits are kind of blend those together for the purpose of this. Um, for the purpose of this, I kind of debated, do I put spirit by itself? I'm like, okay, I'll just leave it like that. And then the body. So getting everything ready. Uh, if we're going to prepare food, there's a procedure we follow, starting with washing our hands. And so I make a comparison with, before I go to the comparison, I just want to say this, and I kind of hinted at it when I talked about even if you're lying down, you can approach God, and that's fine. And but when we come, but even then, we want to have certain things, the mind, the heart, the spirit. We want to have those attuned to God. But we also recognize that there are going to be times when all we have time for is God or Jesus, you know? And then it's not like, so I don't want this to be like a heavy duty thing. Oh God, I have to prepare my mind, my heart. Maybe just going along during the day and we talking with God, or something comes up and we just need to check in with God. Of course, we know it's just in the normal course. That's part of God coming to us and allowing us to relate with intimacy. So just be aware of that type of thing. But if we are living in a state of reverence before God, and everything we do is unto the Lord, as the epistle, the apostle tells us, then we will always have the kind of attitude that is reverent. And then when we come to our specific times, all we'll be adding is intentionality. Colossians 3, verse 17, it says, "And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him." So if we have that attitude, then the posture of living, then we'd be fine. So here's something to consider. There is a certain protocol for temporal leaders, whether they be called kings or queens, presidents, prime ministers, whatever. There is a certain protocol that is followed. And so you think of people who are going to see the president of the States, which is the country those of us who are tuned in here right now are in. People don't go anyhow. They dress themselves to enter his presence. So far as being a he, they dress themselves to enter his presence. They don't go looking frumpy. And then there's certain protocols you're advised on what to do and what not to do. And most countries it's like this, not necessarily all, but most. You have to follow certain things. And my point is, if we do this for temporal leaders, why would we think we can go to God anyhow? I want to read something now from that chapter I referenced earlier, chapter 2. And this is at the very beginning of chapter 2, in How to Pray, Living Holy Through Honest, Surrendered Heart Praying. So it is at page 20, Missing God. "Hey God," she said. I froze. I cringed inside. "It's God you're talking to," I screamed internally. "It's God, not your girlfriend, not your boyfriend." Then I got calmer as my internal monologue continued. Okay, it's wonderful that she feels comfortable with God and feels free to talk with God anytime. God is real to her. You know, that was not the last time, nor the last person I heard address God that way. Years later, after all the rationalization and telling myself don't be too rigid, "Hey God" is still problematic to me. You see, I can't imagine anyone going up to Queen Elizabeth II and saying, "Hey Liz." Even when protocol isn't followed to a T, there's just something about the office. How much more God? So, in addressing God, we seek this balance between the God who is holy and the God who is present with us. It is the balance between the God we worship and the God who invites us to go to God as a loving parent. Without this balance, we're in danger of missing God. Thus, we miss experiencing God more fully through honest, surrendered heart praying. We miss living with greater clarity and peace in the world. And I'm going to stop the recording here and continue the discussion outside of the recording. And thank you for sharing this presentation. And if you want to join us on a Thursday evening, it's livingstressedout.com/evening. God bless you.